Hey everyone, my name's Jeff. Welcome back to JonesWorks. Today I've got a little project for you. This is a Bluetooth speaker made out of hardwood scraps from the shop. I hope you guys enjoy this one. Now let's get to the project. All right, here we go. So to begin, I got a bunch of my scraps and different hardwoods together, started cutting off strips for the glue up. So before actually gluing everything together, I decided to lay everything out, come up with a pattern I like. I didn't want any repeating colors or anything like that, so this is pretty much just whatever you like. Now, when you're gluing strips together like this, thing to avoid is having too many ends of the strips close to each other. That way, when you cut them apart, cut your miters, you don't have too many of the short nubs left over. It also helps if you have a lot of long strips planned out in your patterns here. It gives a lot of rigidity while you're trying to glue up. Send it through the planer, all that stuff. It'll help you out in the long run. Now, for the glue up, I recommend spreading the glue out all over the pieces really well. This is not a structural piece by any means, but it's gonna help a lot with the lamination. I forgot to do this, but it's also good to spread it out on the ends between the strips. Not a huge deal, like I said. This isn't going to be load bearing or anything like that, but just something I should have done. Make sure you use a ton of clamps in this one. Now, before throwing it through the planer, I did chisel off as much of the glue squeeze out as I could. Just help save your blades. And I don't have a jointer, so I made a few shallow passes at the beginning to try to get as flat of a surface as I could, and then ran it through for the rest. Now, this project really highlighted the fact that I need to make a table saw sled, so I'm gonna hopefully make that early next year. In the meantime, I just went ahead and broke out my Incra miter to make all these cuts. Now, I did have to do a lot of cleanup with these miters after the fact. Everybody knows miter gauges aren't super precise. I did the best I could. I just really took my time. Sometimes you gotta make do with what you got. Now, following making the miters, what I'm doing here is creating dados for the front and the back panels to fit into. I set the depth of these dados to roughly half of the outer shell, and then just slowly moved the fence over until I was happy with the width. You could easily do this with a router and router fence. You could also use a dado stack for this, but I found this to be pretty easy, especially with how small this project is. Once I got to the right width of that dado, I just ran the rest of the pieces through. In this particular project, I was trying to base my dimensions around that piece of spalted maple I have. I just had it left over from the last time I made one of these, and then I just used another piece of scrap. I think it's hickory for the back piece. I really love that spalted maple though, so I kind of wanted that to be the main feature of this project. Now for the speakers, I'm just using the Rockler speaker kits, not a sponsor. I think it's an alright little kit. Makes it super easy. Just have to lay out the holes based on the instructions that came with the speakers. Now, one issue you might run into is the holes for the speakers themselves are pretty big, so a fix, what I did is use my largest Forstner bit and then used a rabbiting bit to enlarge the hole, and then using a flush trim bit cleaned up the rest of the hole to make it big enough. And I'd say that worked out pretty well. The glue up on this is pretty easy. I just like to use masking tape. It kind of folds right up just like that. So after doing a quick test fit, glue on both sides of the miter, roll it up and tape it, and you should be pretty good. Now, because you're just gluing up end grain, that typically isn't the strongest joint, so I like to reinforce the corners. You can do this a ton of different ways. I decided to go with dowels. I use this jig to put 45-degree holes through the miters, and then we'll epoxy some. You can use dowels. I'm going to use brass rods through these holes. I decided to go with brass because I had these cutoffs from another project I had. Plus, it's a really soft metal, so you can actually just cut it and sand it with your regular woodworking tools. I just went ahead and epoxied them in using masking tape to try to make the cleanup process a whole lot easier. If you were to do this, I recommend running that drill through the hole just a couple more times, taking more time with that because some of these holes were pretty tight. After they dried, I just nipped them off with the multi-tool. I did one side at a time just so I could have a flat surface when I flipped over the box. I just didn't want any sort of pressure on these miters. Whole point of this is to strengthen the joints. I sure as heck didn't want to break them. Patience is the key when you're doing stuff like this. All of my mistakes come when I'm trying to rush a job. Now, after giving the whole thing a really good sanding, I went ahead and rounded over all of the edges, just a little 1/8 inch round over, mostly for visual appeal. After rounding over the edges, I went ahead and sanded again. I went all the way to 320, although I think 220 would have been perfect. For the finish, I'm using one of my all-time favorites. This is Walrus Oil Furniture Oil. It's super easy to apply. I love the smell of it and the finish, and it's super durable. So I highly recommend it. I'll have the links down below. To finish it off, all you got to do is plug in the wires. They are color coded, and that will wrap this thing up. I really love how this turned out, and it was super fun to make. I think it's beautiful. I love all the different hardwoods together, and it's just a good way to use up scraps in the shop. I know this is a little late in the year to be a gift suggestion, but this is a good gift idea and a good way to use up scraps that you have laying around. But anyway, I hope you all have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I'll catch you all on the next project.